Hey everyone, it's John from the LSAT guys, and welcome to our video series on basic argument structure. So if you want to master the logical reasoning section, you have to know how to work with arguments. And that means you have to know how to build, analyze, and describe arguments. Yep, that's right. It's an acronym, BAD, because you're trying to be a bad LSAT mamma jamma. And that's exactly what our video series is going to help you become. So if you want to master these critical logical reasoning skills, stick with us for the entire series. All right, let's get started. Before we can do any work with arguments, we have to figure out what the word argument actually means on the LSAT. That's the focus of this video. So take a few seconds and consider for yourself, what is an argument? So many people think of this when they think of the word argument. While this concept of argument might make sense in everyday life, the LSAT requires a more formal definition. More precisely, on the LSAT, an argument is a set of statements containing a conclusion along with premises designed to lead to that conclusion. This definition has a couple of key features that I want to point out. First of all, when you read an argument, it's your responsibility to separate it into conclusion and premises. We're going to talk a lot about this when we talk about analyzing arguments, but for now, I just want to point those two things out. The second thing is that we use the word designed here. And that's to emphasize that even a bad argument is still an argument. So it's only important that the premises are designed or intended to prove the conclusion, not that they actually prove the conclusion in order for something to be an argument. So keep that in mind when you're deciding whether you're looking at an argument or a fact set on the LSAT. If you feel like you can perfectly apply that definition, then great. If, on the other hand, you're not a fan of heady abstractions, then you have no business being a lawyer.
What, like it's hard?
Okay, I'm kidding. Actually, what you want to do is to take the abstract concepts that we discuss and turn them into functional knowledge that you can instinctively apply under pressure on test day. That's the point of LSAT training. One mistake that a lot of LSAT students make is they think that intellectually understanding an LSAT concept will be enough.
Evolution of the market economy in the southern colonies.
It will not. If you want to perform under pressure, you have to have an intuitive understanding of what's going on the LSAT. So to that end, I've got a great visual metaphor that you can use to make this definition of an argument a little bit more intuitive. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the wrecking ball model of argument structure.
I came in like a wrecking ball.
So in this visual metaphor, each individual link in the chain is a premise, and the ball or weight is the conclusion. Collectively, the premises make up the evidence, and as you can see here, the evidence supports the conclusion, or at least is designed to support the conclusion. But sometimes there is a design flaw, and if there's a break in the chain, the conclusion is not properly supported and will fall to the ground. In that case, we would call the argument logically invalid. We'll come back to this idea of argument validity when we start to analyze arguments. In the meantime, let's take our definition of the word argument and our new visual metaphor and see if we can apply them to properly identify arguments. Now we're going to look at a few passages to see if we can identify which ones are arguments and which ones are not. This might seem like a simple skill, but it is very important in the logical reasoning section to distinguish between argument-based questions and non-argument-based questions. For instance, if you spend a lot of time looking for a conclusion when there is no conclusion, that's going to be a huge time waster. And even worse, it might lead you to take the wrong approach for a given question. So learning how to recognize arguments and distinguish them from non-arguments is a fundamental LSAT skill, and mastering it will help make you much more efficient in the logical reasoning section. Now that we understand why we're doing this, let's dive in and take a look. Here's our first passage. Take a few seconds to consider whether or not we're looking at an argument and why. So if you're thinking this is an argument, you're correct. The reason is that this single sentence contains both of the components that we're looking for in an argument. The first clause, the thing that we're trying to prove, is the conclusion. And the second clause is the reason why the conclusion is true in our minds. So we're trying to prove that you should take your car to the mechanic And the reason is because it's making strange noises. One important note is that since is an evidence keyword. So for the algebraically minded, we have a generic structure here that looks like x since y. So anytime we have this sort of construct, x is true since y is true, x will be the conclusion and y will be the evidence. Now we could substitute since with other words like because, or in less common cases, the word for, and we'll talk about these later. But the important thing to note is that a lot of times you're given keywords that indicate either evidence or conclusion, and you can leverage those to figure out what part of the argument you're looking at. So the major takeaway from this example is that arguments can be a single sentence. This sentence contains both evidence and conclusion. So on the LSAT, you can't read sentence by sentence, you have to read clause by clause. And once you get into the habit of reading clause by clause, you'll be much better equipped to parse arguments properly into evidence and conclusion. Now take a few seconds to consider our next example. This sentence might seem like a strong assertion. However, it's not an argument. And the reason why is that it's missing any evidence to back it up. It's just a naked assertion. Whether you agree or disagree with this statement is irrelevant to whether it's an argument. Remember, an argument must have both conclusion and evidence, and this is missing evidence. Our next passage is modeled off of question 5 from the first logical reasoning section of Prep Test 52. Take a few seconds to consider this passage, and then we'll discuss. So this passage is not an argument. It actually comes from an inference question. And what you'll notice is that each sentence is stated in a very factual manner, and on top of that, there's no clear hierarchy of ideas. What that means is we could basically reorder the sentences and it wouldn't change the meaning of the passage. So because there's no clear distinction between evidence and conclusion within this passage, this is not an argument. Here's another passage modeled off of a question from Prep Test 52, first logical reasoning section, question number 4. In this passage, we get a clear keyword, therefore. When we're looking at the word therefore, anything that comes after it is a conclusion that's based on the information that came before the word therefore. So again, a lot of times we get these keywords that will tell us whether we're looking at evidence or conclusion. And so when they're there, we have to make good use of them. One thing you may have noticed is that there's a disconnect here between evidence and conclusion. There's no direct link between the charitable interests of the foundation's donors and the duty to donate large amounts of money to certain causes. We don't know what the donor's interests are, so we don't know whether that involves donating money at all even. So the point here is that it's not necessary for an argument to be valid in order to still be an argument. The only requirements are that an argument contains evidence and conclusion. So if we think back to that definition, we have to remember the evidence is designed to lead to the given conclusion. It doesn't always actually do that. So let's take a look at one more sample passage. So this is another naked assertion. It's not an argument because there is no evidence to support this idea that people should generally brush and floss twice a day. Now, this is a recommendation that many people would agree with, but that doesn't mean it's an argument. Again, you have to have evidence and conclusion to qualify as an argument. As we've seen in this exercise, arguments can be very simple or very complex. Properly distinguishing arguments from non-arguments or fact sets depends on recognizing whether a passage contains conclusion that is supported by evidence. If so, you're looking at an argument. Now that we know what an argument is on the LSAT, we can start to discuss how to analyze arguments in general. That's what our next video will cover. If you're enjoying this topic and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video and click on the bell icon to receive notifications when we upload new information on acing the LSAT. As always, we're thrilled to be part of your LSAT journey.